There's a certain kind of silence that lives in the woods, the kind that doesn't rest, it listens. Welcome to No Name, a place for those of us who felt that silence while camping under an empty sky, who know that the wilderness holds more than beauty. Here, we tell true and inspired stories from the road, stories from RV travelers, campers, and wanderers across the United States who stumbled into something they can't explain. Every sound, every shadow, every choice you make out there can change what follows you home. So if you've ever camped alone, if you've ever felt watched in the dark, you're in the right place. When you're done with this story, tell me what you would have done, because this one still keeps me up some nights. This is why I stopped RV camping after West Virginia. My name's Eli Mercer. I'm 36 years old, and until last year, RV camping was my version of freedom. Not the kind that shows up on glossy travel blogs or Instagram reels. Mine was the quiet kind, the kind that smelled like burnt coffee on a cold morning, that hummed through the floorboards of my old Volkswagen camper, that made the world feel open and endless. I used to drive through forgotten towns, old mining roads, and camp wherever the light felt honest. West Virginia was supposed to be another one of those drives. Just another line drawn across the Appalachians, 4 days of open road, a few campgrounds, a lot of silence. But the thing about the Appalachian Hills is they hold sound differently. It doesn't echo. It lingers. And if you listen too long, you start to realize not all of it belongs to you. I entered the state from the south, coming up from Virginia through narrow, winding roads that seemed to coil around the ridges. The map said there was a campground called Beach Hollow, just outside a place named Wilder Run, population maybe 200. I liked the sound of that. By the time I got there, evening light was caught in the trees like thin gold threads. The place was empty except for one RV at the far end, a big fifth wheel, silver, parked crooked like whoever drove it hadn't cared much about lining up with the sight posts. I pulled into the opposite side, plugged in my shore power, leveled my old VW bus, and sat on the small step by the door. It was one of those evenings that hums with peace, the kind where every sound seems sharper. Cicadas, a creek running shallow somewhere behind the hill, the faint creak of cooling metal under my hands. When I finally noticed the smell, it was faint, metallic, earthy, like rusted water. I figured it was from the creek. Around 9, I walked to the campground's little bathhouse. The lights flickered when I stepped in. Everything smelled like bleach and humidity, the way old camp bathrooms always do. One of the mirrors was cracked, spiderwebbing across my reflection. When I came back outside, I heard something. A short, dull thud from the trees behind the bathhouse. It wasn't the kind of sound that makes you jump. It was the kind that makes you stop. Another thud, heavier, followed by what sounded like the slide of something against bark. I shone my flashlight, but all it caught was dust in the air. That's when I saw a light flick on in the other RV, a pale yellow glow spilling out from a half-closed curtain. I almost called out, but I didn't, because for some reason the light didn't comfort me. It looked wrong, not warm, not homey, just like someone was awake who shouldn't be. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear a different rhythm, a knock, a shuffle, then silence that felt aware of itself. Once I woke to what I thought was footsteps near the gravel by my van. I sat up fast enough to hit my head on the cabinet, waited, held my breath, nothing. At dawn, the world felt normal again. I stepped outside, made coffee on the camp stove, and looked toward that silver fifth wheel. Its curtains were all closed now. No sound. No tire marks suggesting anyone had left. But I could tell the door was open, just a sliver. I thought maybe they'd gone hiking, maybe forgot to latch it. That would have made sense, except when I passed it on my way out later that morning, there was a smell leaking from inside, something old, sour, and damp, like mildew and iron. I knocked once, out of courtesy. No answer. I don't know why I even tried the handle. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was instinct, the kind that tells you you need to know before you keep driving. But the door was locked, and I felt a kind of relief I didn't expect. The next night I stayed at another campground, Elk Ridge, about 40 miles north. It sat lower in a valley, ringed by sycamores and poplar trees that seemed to lean inward like they were guarding the place. There were maybe 3 other campers, an old man in a Class C, a couple in a Jeep with rooftop tents, and me. When the sun went down, I walked a short trail behind the site. It led to a small overlook where you could see the lights of Wilder Run blinking faintly in the distance. It looked peaceful from up there, the kind of quiet town that goes to sleep early and wakes up slow. But standing there, I heard a sound, faint, like wood tapping wood. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Not random, deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the trees. I turned back toward camp. I told myself it was woodpeckers or a tree shifting in the wind. That's the thing about camping alone. Your brain builds stories faster than you can shut them down. But that night, just before sleep, I heard those knocks again, closer, clearer. 3, pause, 2, followed by what sounded like soft humming. The next morning, the couple with the rooftop tent was gone. No trace, not even tire tracks in the gravel. The camp host said he hadn't seen them leave. Probably left early, he said, but his tone didn't match his words. Later, I stopped in Wilder Run to refill propane and grab coffee. The woman behind the counter asked where I was staying. When I said Beach Hollow a couple nights ago, then Elk Ridge, her hand froze halfway to the register. Elk Ridge? She repeated. Yeah, I said, smiling like it was nothing. Nice spot. She didn't smile back. Instead, she leaned forward slightly and said, You camping alone? When I nodded, she said, You hear tapping, you leave. Don't go looking for it. Then she rang me up, slid the change across the counter, and never looked at me again. I left town that afternoon, telling myself she was just superstitious. But as the road twisted deeper into the hollers, that same unease came back, the kind that hums low in your chest and never fully leaves. By the time dusk rolled in, fog had settled low, so thick I could barely see past my headlights. I didn't plan to stop, but my gas gauge was near empty, and I spotted a hand-painted sign nailed to a tree. RV camping 1 mile ahead, with an arrow pointing left. The road turned to gravel, then dirt, lined with trees that seemed to press closer the farther I went. I almost turned back twice, but then I saw the clearing, a rough field with 3 electric hookups and a sagging wooden sign. Riverside Campground. No office, no host, just a metal box for self-pay and a few faded slips tucked inside. I parked at the far end, plugged in, and shut off the engine. The silence was instant. Not peaceful. Absolute. Even the crickets were gone. That's when I realized something that made my stomach turn cold. There were footprints, not boot prints, not animal. Bare feet, small, leading away from the hookups into the woods, fresh enough to still hold shape in the dirt. And as I followed them with my flashlight, they stopped, abruptly, at the edge of a dark patch where the fog seemed to swallow the light itself. That's when I heard it again. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. I stood there in the fog, light shaking in my hand, listening for something that would explain the knocks. Silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my own pulse, heavy, off rhythm, like it didn't belong to me. Then it came again. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. This time closer, somewhere between the trees and the thin line of the creek that ran behind the campsite. Hey, I said, my voice cracking. If someone's out there, I'm armed. That wasn't true. The only thing I had was a folding knife in the glove box. But saying it out loud made me feel like I still had some control. The fog didn't answer. I waited another minute, 2, maybe longer, until my flashlight started to dim. When I turned back toward the van, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Condensation streaked across the back window, like someone had pressed their hand against the glass and dragged it downward. Only problem was I'd just cleaned that window a few hours earlier. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me flinch. The pop of cooling metal, the rustle of leaves outside, even my own breath. At some point, I must have dozed off sitting upright, because when I opened my eyes, it was morning. Bright, clean, normal. For a second, I almost convinced myself it had all been in my head. Then I stepped outside. The footprints were gone. Not just faded, gone. The ground around my RV was smooth as if it had been swept, and on my windshield, written faintly in streaks of dew, were 5 marks, uneven like the tips of fingers dragged downward. By late morning, I'd had enough. I didn't even bother disconnecting the shore power cord properly, just yanked it loose, tossed it in the back, and drove off the gravel road until I hit pavement. When I finally reached a small diner about 10 miles north, I parked in front where the sunlight felt safe. My hands were still trembling when I ordered breakfast. The waitress, maybe mid-40s, kind eyes, poured my coffee and asked if I was camping nearby. I told her the name Riverside Campground, expecting the same wary look I'd gotten before. But she didn't flinch. She just frowned and said, "That place hasn't been open in years." "What do you mean?" I asked. She set the coffee pot down. "You mean the one by the old bridge?" "Yeah," I said. "The sign said RV camping." She shook her head. "Honey, that sign's been up since before the flood. Washed half that land out 10 years ago. Nobody camps there now. The ground's unstable. Locals don't even walk it." Something cold slid through my chest. Not fear exactly, just the feeling of my mind trying to rearrange itself around something it didn't want to believe. I didn't argue. I just ate in silence, paid, and drove out. The plan was to head west, maybe cross into Kentucky, find a proper state park, somewhere with rangers, lights, other people. But the farther I drove, the less sense the roads made. GPS kept rerouting me in loops, every turn bringing me back to the same narrow stretch of highway lined with broken fences and mailboxes missing numbers. Around mid-afternoon, I saw a rusted sign for Route 17 and a dirt pull-off beside it. I stopped to check the map, an actual paper one I kept in the glove box, but the road I was on wasn't even marked. That's when I noticed movement in the rearview mirror. A figure, maybe 50 yards back, standing by the tree line. Barefoot, head tilted slightly like they were listening. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. The rational part of my brain, the one that plans routes, checks tire pressure, knows how to fix a leaky propane line, just shut down. Then the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. It took me 10 seconds to grab the keys, throw open the door, and pop the hood. I don't even know why. Habit, maybe. I'd fixed this van 100 times. It always listened when I talked to it. But that day, it just sat there, silent and still. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe it had just been a shadow, the fog playing tricks again. Then I heard the knocking. 3, pause, 2, but this time it came from the side of the van. Right beside me. I dropped the hood, jumped inside, and slammed the locks. The knocking continued, slower now, like whoever it was could feel my panic. 3, pause, 2. I hit the ignition again, praying, whispering, begging, and on the third try, the engine caught. Gravel sprayed as I pulled out, tires skidding, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I didn't stop for 2 hours. Not until the road widened and I saw a highway sign for Charleston. Civilization. Gas stations. Light. By then, my body felt hollowed out, every muscle buzzing, every nerve on edge. I pulled into a rest area just outside the city, parked under a tall floodlight, and sat there with the engine running. I must have stayed like that for an hour before I finally cut the ignition. The silence that followed was suffocating, but at least it was predictable. I walked to the restroom, splashed cold water on my face, looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked older, not tired, older. That's when I noticed something behind me, faint but clear. A smear of 5 prints on the back of my jacket, mud or dirt, I couldn't tell, shaped like small hands, dragged downward. I didn't sleep that night either. I kept the van lights on, curtains closed, phone on my chest like a weapon. Nothing happened. No sounds, no knocks, just the hum of highway noise and distant engines. In the morning, I told myself it was over, that I'd just been exhausted, paranoid, imagining things. I almost believed it, until I stopped at a gas station outside Morgantown. There was a man at the next pump, older, wiry, wearing a mechanic's shirt with Rudy stitched on it. He glanced at my van, then at me. "You been down through Wilder Run?" he asked. I froze. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Why?" He nodded toward the side panel of my van. "You might want to wash that off before it dries." I stepped around to look. There, streaked faintly along the lower paint, were 5 parallel smudges, the same length, the same drag marks, like a hand had trailed along the metal while I drove. Rudy must have seen the color leave my face because he said quietly, "People say the hills down there remember things. Some places just don't let go." That was 8 months ago. I sold the van 2 weeks later. Couldn't even bring myself to clean it first, just left it at the edge of the buyer's lot and walked away. I still camp sometimes, but never alone, never past dusk, and never anywhere near West Virginia. Because sometimes when I close my eyes and the world goes quiet, I still hear it. Faint, deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. And somewhere deep in me, I know it's not a sound from the outside world anymore. It's memory, and memory doesn't fade. That's why I stopped RV camping after West Virginia. Because freedom, I learned, isn't always out there waiting for you in the dark. Sometimes it's what you have to give up before the dark decides to keep you. I've always believed that silence can tell you more about a place than words ever could. And if that's true, then the silence of West Virginia told me everything I needed to know, far too late. My name's Eli Mercer, I'm 36, and I travel the country in my RV, a sleek silver 2021 Winnebago Solus I bought right after my divorce finalized. It's got a compact kitchen, a fold-out bed, and solar panels that keep the fridge humming, even when I'm 3 hours from the nearest town. I call it freedom on wheels, or at least I used to. That fall, I'd set out for the Monongahela National Forest. 900,000 acres of wild ridgelines, fog, and rivers that twist through valleys like veins under pale skin. I wanted to film a few campground reviews for my travel channel. Nothing fancy, just a few drone shots, some narration, maybe a lesson about solitude and self-reliance. But mostly, I just wanted quiet. The kind of quiet that resets you. I entered through a forest road near Huttonsville, just as the afternoon light began to thin. The GPS had lost its signal 20 minutes earlier, but I wasn't worried. The road curved like a gray ribbon between the pines, and I felt that familiar mix of excitement and calm. That's what I loved most about RV camping. That moment when you lose signal, when the world goes quiet, and you realize it's just you, your rig, and the earth. But that first night, the quiet didn't feel right. I'd parked in a small clearing off a gravel road near a shallow creek. There were no other campers, which, to me, was perfect. I set up my camp chair, cracked open a beer, and started recording some footage as the sun went down. The trees went black before the sky did. Fireflies appeared for a few minutes, blinking like tiny signals in the dark, and then they too disappeared. Around 9, I heard something. Not an animal, not the wind, something like metal. It was faint, a clink, then another, somewhere beyond the creek. I turned off my lantern and listened. Nothing. Then it came again, sharper this time. Metal against metal. I tried to laugh it off, maybe some old fence gate swinging in the wind or a deer brushing against something rusty. I even recorded a short voice note into my phone. Open quote, "Note to self, don't let the woods psych you out, Eli." Close quote. But later that night, when I lay in bed, the sound returned. Closer. Clink, clink. A pause. Then 1, 2, 3 in rhythm, like someone tapping a wrench against a pole. My chest tightened. The sound stopped the moment I sat up. I waited, nothing but the creak of trees and the faint rush of water. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I've camped all over the Appalachians, heard everything from coyotes to feral hogs, so I made the mistake that every seasoned camper eventually makes. I rationalized what scared me. By morning, the forest was drenched in fog. The creek looked like spilled milk under the trees. I made coffee, shook off the night's nerves, and decided to explore the ridge above camp before heading farther east. The trail was old, more animal path than hiking route. Every branch I pushed aside released a burst of cold dew down my sleeves. About a half-mile in, I found something that made me stop. There was a tent, or what used to be one. It was torn open, fabric shredded like claws had been taken to it. Inside, a sleeping bag, half buried in leaves, a rusted lantern, a melted plastic jug. Everything looked like it had been there for months. But here's what didn't fit. The tent poles were still upright. Someone had unzipped the door before tearing it open. I backed away. My boots slid on the wet ground. The fog was so thick now I couldn't see the creek anymore, couldn't even tell which direction the road was. Something told me to turn around and leave it alone. But curiosity's a dangerous thing. I took a photo, just one, and marked the location on my offline map before heading back to the RV. When I got back, there was mud on the passenger door handle. I stared at it for a long time. A single dark smear, fresh enough that it hadn't dried yet. My boots were caked in mud too, but the smudge was higher than I could have made reaching for the handle myself. I wiped it off and told myself again that it was nothing. Maybe I brushed it last night or while loading up gear. But deep down, something primal had started whispering. You're not alone out here. By late afternoon, the sky was the color of wet slate. The forest had gone still. Even the creek seemed quieter, like the air itself was holding its breath. I'd been editing video inside the RV for maybe an hour when I heard footsteps outside. 2 steps, then a pause, then one more. I froze. They were light. Not boots, not the heavy crunch of an animal, more like the slow, careful steps of someone trying not to be heard. I turned off the laptop. The hum of the inverter died. The silence pressed against the walls of the RV. Nothing moved. Then a faint dragging sound near the rear window. My hand went straight to the flashlight beside the bed. I didn't dare turn it on. Instead, I waited, breathing so shallow I could hear my pulse in my ears. The footsteps circled halfway around the vehicle, then stopped again, right beside the side door. And then came a soft, almost polite knock. 3 slow taps, not hard, just deliberate. Every nerve in my body screamed. I stayed still. Whoever it was didn't speak, didn't knock again, just stood there, or maybe crouched, for what felt like a full minute. Then quietly, the sound of gravel shifting, footsteps retreating into the woods. I waited another 10 minutes before I moved. When I finally turned on the light, my hands were trembling so bad I dropped the flashlight. I wanted to believe it was some hunter or a lost hiker. But deep down I knew, nobody hikes this deep after dark. I slept with the engine keys in my pocket that night. Didn't even take off my boots. At some point around 3 a.m. I heard something hit the side of the RV. Hard. A single thud that shook the whole frame. I shot upright, heart slamming. Another hit came, lower this time, near the back bumper. Then another. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the fog, white and useless, showing nothing but trees. I floored it down that gravel road, tires spitting rock and dust behind me. The forest blurred past. Black trunks, flashes of white fog came, the glow of my dashboard flickering like a heartbeat. When I finally reached the paved road, I stopped. My hands were shaking too bad to keep driving. I opened the window, listening. Silence again. No footsteps. No knocking, just wind through the branches. I sat there until dawn, staring at the forest line. And that's when I saw it. A figure. Far down the dirt road I'd just come from, standing half in shadow, half in the light of morning. Too far to make out clearly, but tall, still, facing me. I blinked, and they were gone. I don't remember deciding to drive. I just remember the road bending away beneath my headlights, the trees leaning in like they were listening. The forest was waking up, mist rising off the ground like ghosts lifting from the soil. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure again, standing in the middle of the road, but the mirror showed only fog. After 10 miles, the gas gauge blinked low. I hadn't planned to use this much fuel. I pulled into a small service turnout, one of those narrow rest stops carved out of the woods, with a single rusted trash can and a faded map board nobody's updated in decades. I killed the engine, stepped out, and leaned against the hood. For a long minute, I just listened. Birds, wind, the normal sounds of morning. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe whoever knocked was just a hunter, someone checking out my RV, wondering if I was friendly or dangerous. Maybe the thuds were branches, rocks kicked up by my tires. I told myself all those things, but none of them settled in my chest. There was a hollowness inside me now, that quiet knowledge that once fear enters a place, it never really leaves. I decided to find cell service and call the ranger's office. Not to report anyone, just to check if there had been other campers in the area. But my phone still showed no signal, not even one bar. The air felt heavy, electric. Like a storm was coming, though the sky above was clear. I got back in the RV, started the engine again, and drove. The road narrowed, curling upward through thick stands of spruce. Each turn felt tighter than the last, the drop-off steeper. That's when I noticed something in the mirror, a flicker of movement. At first I thought it was just the fog shifting, but then it appeared again, a flash of color, something dark and low to the ground, keeping pace behind me. I slowed down. It slowed too. I braked hard and looked back. Nothing but the empty road. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing moved. So I did what fear makes you do. I convinced myself it was my imagination and kept going. Half an hour later, I spotted a small wooden sign, Bear Creek Campground, 2 miles, pointing down an even smaller road. I remembered reading about it online. Primitive sites, no hookups, rarely patrolled. A place where I could at least stop, rest, and think. When I reached it, the campground was deserted. 10 empty pads, a pit toilet, and a broken picnic table beside a small pond. I parked near the tree line, killed the engine, and stepped out. The silence was total again. That strange West Virginia silence that seems to breathe with you. I made coffee, tried to calm down, and started reviewing the footage on my camera. That's when I saw it. In one of the clips I'd filmed the day before, a drone shot panning over the creek. There was movement in the frame. On the far bank, half hidden in shadow, someone was standing there. A man, wearing what looked like a brown jacket, watching me. My mouth went dry. I rewound it twice, 3 times. Each time it was clearer. He wasn't hiking. He was standing still, facing the camera, watching. I looked up at the tree line outside the window, and for the first time in my life, I locked every door on my RV in daylight. By afternoon, the clouds had gathered, thick and low, bruised purple along the edges. Rain began to fall in uneven sheets, tapping against the roof like nervous fingers. I tried to focus on editing, on normal tasks, anything to keep my mind anchored, but every noise made me jump, every creak of the RV, every gust of wind scraping a branch against the side. Then came the sound that made my blood turn cold. Footsteps. In the mud. Slow. Careful. Circling again. I muted my breathing, crouched low by the bed. Through the narrow gap in the blinds, I could see movement, a figure passing between the trees. Tall. Shoulders hunched, face hidden beneath a hood. He was holding something. A crowbar. I froze. My phone still had no service. The keys were in the ignition, but the thought of starting the engine, making noise, felt like setting off a flare in the dark. The figure approached the back of the RV. I could hear his boots sucking in and out of the mud, could hear the faint scrape of metal against metal, then a clang, the sound of the crowbar hitting the door handle. He was trying to pry it open. Adrenaline surged through me. I grabbed the small hatchet I kept near the kitchenette. More a camping tool than a weapon, but it was all I had. The side door rattled. Metal groaned. Then silence. I waited, chest heaving, every muscle trembling with fear. Another sound, footsteps moving toward the front. He was trying the driver's door now. The handle jerked once, twice. Then the sound of heavy breathing, right outside the window. Without thinking, I slammed my hand on the horn. The blast of noise shattered the quiet, echoing off the trees. The figure jerked back, stumbling into the mud. I saw his face then, or part of it, pale, thin. Eyes wide like an animal caught in headlights. He turned and bolted into the woods. I didn't wait. I threw the RV into gear and floored it, tires spinning in the mud before catching the gravel road. Rain pounded the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up. My hands were slick on the wheel, my breath coming in sharp gasps. For nearly an hour, I drove without stopping. No idea where I was going, just putting distance between me and that campground. When I finally hit a paved road, I pulled over near a ranger station. The building was dark, empty. A handwritten note taped to the door read, "Closed for the season." I laughed, a dry, hysterical sound that didn't even feel like mine. The storm was easing now, thunder rolling away into the hills. I checked my phone again. Finally, 1 bar. I called 911. The operator's voice was calm, professional. She asked where I was, if I was hurt. I told her about the man, the crowbar, the tent I'd found in the woods. She said she'd send a deputy from Randolph County to meet me. It might take an hour. I sat in the driver's seat watching the tree line, waiting for flashing lights that didn't come. The rain dripped from the gutters of the roof, steady and slow. That's when I noticed movement again, not in the woods this time, but in the reflection of the passenger window. A shape. Behind me. I turned. Too late. The back door of the RV was open. He was inside. The back door of the RV hung open, rain dripping down from the frame, splattering onto the rubber floor. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed to run, but I was frozen, caught between disbelief and terror. Then I saw him. He stepped forward from the shadows of the rear storage area. Same brown jacket, same pale, hollow face. His eyes looked wrong, not wild, not angry, empty, like he hadn't slept in years. Mud streaked his cheeks, his hair plastered to his forehead, and in his right hand the crowbar, black with rain, catching the dim light. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking. "Just get out of my RV." He didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me or listening for something else. Then he took another slow step forward. That broke the spell. I lunged for the hatchet on the counter. He swung first. The crowbar whistled through the air, hitting the wall beside me with a sharp clang. I ducked, kicked out, connected with his knee. He stumbled backward, hit the table, knocked the coffee mug to the floor. I didn't think. I just swung. The flat edge of the hatchet caught his arm, not deep but enough to make him yell. He dropped the crowbar and clutched his elbow, gasping. "Stop!" I shouted. "Just stop!" For a moment, he did. He looked at me, really looked at me, and something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition? Sadness? I couldn't tell. Then he turned, stumbled toward the back door, and disappeared into the rain. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and collapsed to the floor. My hands were shaking so badly the hatchet clattered from my grip. I could hear him outside, running, crashing through the brush, moving toward the tree line. Then silence again. I didn't wait for the deputy anymore. I started the engine and drove, headlights cutting through sheets of rain, tires spraying mud. The forest blurred by, a tunnel of wet bark and fog. Every sound, every echo felt like him behind me. When I finally hit the highway, I didn't stop until I reached Elkins, where the gas stations and streetlights looked like another planet after all that darkness. I pulled into the first lit parking lot I saw, a small grocery store, and sat there, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. The adrenaline was gone now. What replaced it was something heavier, shock, disbelief, and a bone-deep exhaustion that made my vision swim. I called the sheriff's office again, gave them my location. Within 20 minutes, a cruiser pulled up beside me. The deputy was young, calm, methodical. He took my statement, walked around the RV, checked the locks and doors. When I told him about the man, he frowned. "There have been a few reports," he said quietly. "Folks camping out in the forest, finding things moved around, gear missing. Someone even said they saw a guy watching their site from the woods. We've been trying to find him, but those hills go on forever." He paused. "You're lucky you got out when you did." I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow. He followed me to a small inn in town, made sure I was safe, told me to get some rest. That night, I lay in a real bed for the first time in weeks, white sheets, humming air conditioner, thin curtains drawn shut, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face again, pale, expressionless, watching. I kept thinking about that old tent I'd found, the torn fabric, the half-buried sleeping bag. What if that wasn't just an abandoned campsite? What if it had been his? What if he'd been living out there all this time, half feral, waiting for someone else to wander too deep into his woods? That thought chilled me more than the attack itself. The next morning, I drove to the ranger station. In daylight, it looked smaller, harmless. A woman behind the desk took my statement, promised they'd send a search team to Bear Creek. She said quietly, "People disappear in those forests sometimes. Locals know to stay near the main roads. But outsiders, they don't always listen." Outsiders. That word stuck with me the whole drive back to the interstate because that's what I'd been, an outsider. I'd come into that forest chasing peace, chasing solitude, chasing something I thought I'd lost. And the truth was, I'd found it, just not the kind I wanted. Solitude isn't silence. It's a mirror. It shows you what's really waiting in the quiet, the things you've been running from, the guilt, the grief, the instincts you ignore until they start screaming. When I look back now, I realize the warning signs were there from the start. The fog, the tent, the knock, the silence that wasn't silence at all. Every part of that place was trying to tell me something. Leave. But pride is louder than fear, until it's not. I took a month off the road after that, parked the RV in my friend's driveway in North Carolina, let it sit there like a sleeping animal. I told myself I was done. No more solo trips, no more deep woods, no more chasing the thrill of being off-grid. But the thing about people like me, the ones who find peace in motion, is that stillness eventually feels like a cage. So a few weeks later I went back out, not to West Virginia, never again there, but somewhere quieter, flatter, safer. I kept the lights on. I stayed near other campers. I learned the sound of every branch, every creak of the RV, every call of an owl, until I could tell when something didn't belong. Because that's the lesson nobody tells you about RV life, the one that never makes it into the glossy Instagram posts or the travel blogs. Out there, alone in the deep woods of America, you're not just testing your courage, you're betting your life on your instincts. And if you ignore them, even once, you might not get a second chance. I still travel, still camp. But every time I cross a state line, I remember that night in Monongahela. The knock on the door, the footsteps in the mud, the hollow eyes in the rain, and I remember the voice in my head, quiet and certain, whispering what I should have listened to from the start. Never go RV camping alone in West Virginia. It's too dangerous. I've always believed that traveling alone teaches you more about people than traveling with them ever could. You learn how silence feels when there's no one to fill it. You learn how your instincts sound when there's no one else to drown them out. My name's Mark. I'm 37 years old, and for most of the last decade, I've spent my free time chasing quiet places across America in my RV. Old Volkswagens, beat-up Winnebagos, whatever runs and smells like freedom. That year, I'd planned a long route through the Appalachian Spine, down from Pennsylvania, cutting into West Virginia. I wanted to see the Monongahela National Forest before the season turned. Everyone told me the same thing before I left. Be careful in the hollers. I'd laugh it off. I've camped everywhere, from Arizona deserts to Montana's frozen lakes. I thought I knew what isolation meant. But there's something about West Virginia that feels different. The silence isn't empty. It listens. It was late September when I crossed into Tucker County. The air was damp, almost metallic, the kind that makes your headlights feel weaker. I'd been driving all day looking for a campground I'd marked online called Bear Creek Hollow. It wasn't official, no ranger station, no website. Just a pin on a map and a few grainy pictures posted by someone years ago. That was what drew me to it. When I finally found the turnoff, it was barely visible, an unmarked gravel path cutting into dense forest. My tires crunched over stones as my headlights washed through the trees. For a mile or two, I didn't see another sign of life. Just tall pines pressing together so tightly it felt like they were leaning in to look at me. Then I saw it. A clearing with a handful of fire pits, an old picnic table collapsed to one side, and a rusted sign that might once have said Bear Creek Hollow. The paint had peeled to almost nothing. I parked the RV at the far edge, close to the tree line. The air was heavy, the kind of quiet that amplifies every little sound. Insects buzzing, leaves ticking against one another, the pop of the cooling engine. I felt fine, though. It was beautiful in its own way, raw, unfiltered nature. I cooked a simple dinner, cracked a beer, and sat outside listening to the crickets. When the darkness deepened, I noticed something strange. The crickets went silent all at once. It wasn't gradual, just gone, like someone had turned off a switch. Then, from somewhere down the road I'd come from, I heard a sound, slow, deliberate crunching, footsteps. At first, I thought it was just another camper arriving late. I grabbed my flashlight and waited for headlights, but none came. The footsteps stopped. I swept the beam toward the road, nothing but fog and trees. It's strange how quickly your mind jumps between explanations. First, it's maybe an animal, then someone walking a dog, then, before you even realize it, it's someone watching me. I forced myself to laugh. I was alone in the woods, that's all. Everything sounds like something it's not when you're alone. I went back inside, locked the RV door, and told myself to sleep. But around 2 a.m., I woke to another sound. This one, sharper. 3 quick knocks on the side of the RV. I froze, listened. Then again, knock, 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 perfectly spaced, not random. I whispered out, "Hello?" No answer. Just silence, deep and bottomless. I didn't open the door. Instead, I turned off all the lights inside and waited, heart pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, staring through the blinds, flashlight in hand, waiting for any movement. Nothing. And then, I swear this is true, I heard footsteps moving away. Slow, deliberate. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I told myself it must have been some local prank, maybe kids messing around. I made coffee, stepped outside, and tried to shake it off, but that's when I saw the footprints. They weren't boot prints. They looked like bare feet, big, wide, human. I followed them a few yards into the mud by the creek, then lost them in the brush. That was when something in me, something buried deep, said, "Leave." But I didn't. I'm stubborn like that. I told myself that fear makes people see patterns that aren't there. Instead of packing up, I decided to drive into the nearest town for supplies, and maybe to ask around. The town was called Parsons. Small, quiet, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. There was one diner, one gas station, and not much else. I parked my RV outside the diner and went in for breakfast. A waitress, mid-50s, friendly face but watchful eyes, poured me coffee and asked where I was headed. When I told her I was camping at Bear Creek Hollow, she stopped pouring. The pot hovered midair. "You're staying out there?" she asked. "Yeah, just for a few nights." She put the pot down slowly. "Nobody camps out there anymore." I asked her why, but she just shrugged. "Some things don't like being disturbed," she said, "and some people neither." Before I could press her, a man at the counter, older, wearing a faded camo hat, turned his head slightly and said, "If you're smart, you'll be gone before sundown." He didn't look at me when he said it, just stared into his coffee like it was telling him something. I drove back uneasy. It was one of those drives where the world looks the same, but feels different. The forest that looked peaceful the night before now felt tight, almost suffocating. When I pulled back into the clearing, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a second fire pit. It hadn't been there before. Still smoking faintly. Someone had been there. I checked the perimeter. Nothing else out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every tree felt like it was holding its breath. I decided to pack up and leave by dusk, but as the light fell, the fog thickened fast, like it rose from the ground itself. I could barely see past the windshield. The road out twisted through steep, narrow turns, like no cell service, no margin for error. So I stayed. One more night, I told myself, lock the doors, keep the lights low, leave first thing in the morning. That night, the sounds returned. Not footsteps this time, whispers, or maybe the wind carrying words that weren't there. I sat up in bed, every sense strained, hearing something faint circling the RV. Then a low thud, like a hand slapping the metal siding. Then another. I turned on the headlights. Through the mist, I saw movement. A figure at the edge of the trees, barefoot, watching. For a moment, my brain refused to make sense of it. The fog blurred everything, but I could see the outline. Tall, thin, shoulders hunched forward slightly, just standing there at the edge of the tree line. The headlights caught the pale of his skin, slick with moisture, like he'd been standing there for hours. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. My first instinct was to shout, but something in me said, don't. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was something older, animal. I reached for the handle of the RV door, then stopped. He took a single step forward. I slammed the headlights off. The world went black again. I held my breath, listening, but the only thing I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, faintly, the sound of someone walking away. Slow, crunching over leaves, fading into the trees. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, every muscle locked, waiting for dawn. When the light finally came, the fog thinned and the forest looked normal again. Too normal, like it was pretending. I stepped outside. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. The footprints were still there, leading from the trees right up to the RV door. And something else. On the side of the RV, smeared in what looked like mud, were 3 marks. Vertical, long, deliberate, like someone dragging their fingers down the metal. I backed up until I hit a tree. My chest was tight, my pulse loud. This wasn't random anymore. Someone had been here, and they wanted me to know it. I packed my things fast, threw everything inside without caring how it landed, and started the engine. It sputtered once, twice, then caught. Relief washed through me. I drove hard down the gravel road, watching the mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see that figure standing in the road. When I reached the main highway, I stopped at the first gas station I found, a place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. A single attendant sat behind the counter, wiry, maybe mid-40s, staring at me as I walked in. "You coming from the Hollow?" he asked before I said a word. I froze. "Yeah." "You know about it?" He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on me. "Ain't much out there but trouble. You're lucky you got out." "What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned back, chewing on something. "There's folks that live out that way. Don't take kindly to strangers. Been like that a long time." I told him about the barefoot man, the knocking, the handprints. He didn't look surprised. "Don't go back," he said finally. "Whatever you saw, you didn't." I should have listened, but curiosity is a dangerous thing when it mixes with pride. I drove to the local sheriff's office in Parsons to file a report, half expecting to be laughed out of the building. The deputy on duty, a broad man with sunburned cheeks, took notes without saying much. When I mentioned Bear Creek Hollow, his eyes flicked up. "You said you saw a man? Barefoot?" "Yeah." He sighed through his nose, then shut the notepad. "You didn't by chance take any photos?" "No, it happened too fast." "Then there's not much we can do," he said. "If you want advice, leave it alone. Folks up there like to be left alone." There it was again. That same phrase, same tone. Like everyone in this county was reading from the same unspoken script. I left, but the feeling didn't leave me. That night, I parked at a proper campground closer to town, full hookups, people nearby, the kind of place where fear starts to feel like something you imagined. I told myself I'd drive south in the morning and forget about it. But that night, as I sat by the fire scrolling through my phone, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. A new post on a local message board, time-stamped less than an hour ago. A blurry photo. My RV. Parked in the Hollow. The caption read, "You forgot something." I stared at it for a long time, unable to breathe. I hadn't told anyone the make, the color, or even where exactly I'd camped. Someone had followed me, or maybe they'd been watching the whole time. I reported the post to the sheriff's office, but they brushed it off again, said it was probably a prank. That night, I slept with a knife under my pillow. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving West Virginia. But before I did, something in me wanted closure. Some thread of logic to tie this madness together. So instead of heading for the interstate, I took one last detour back toward Bear Creek Hollow. I told myself it was just to see if the RV marks were still there, to prove to myself it wasn't all paranoia. The forest road was worse this time. Ruts, branches, fog thicker than ever. When I reached the clearing, it was empty. My fire pit gone, the picnic table gone, like no one had ever camped there at all. Except for one thing. In the center of the clearing, nailed to a tree, was a license plate, my license plate, the one that had been on the front of my RV. My stomach dropped. I checked the RV. Sure enough, it was gone. Torn off clean. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Not close, but somewhere deep in the trees. low, mocking, drawn out. I spun around, searching, but the sound moved, left, right, then behind me. I couldn't tell how many voices. 2, 3. I jumped in the RV and slammed the locks. The laughter stopped. The silence was worse. I threw the engine into reverse, spun the wheel, and floored it. Gravel sprayed behind me as I tore down that road, branches scraping the sides, heart hammering like it wanted out of my chest. When I hit pavement again, I didn't stop. Not for gas, not for food. I drove through the night, headlights tunneling through the dark until I crossed into Virginia. Only then did I pull over. The dawn light was cold, gray, lifeless. I got out, walked to the front of the RV, and looked at where the license plate should have been. The edges where it had been torn off weren't bent. They were cut, clean, deliberate. That meant tools. That meant time. That meant someone had been right there while I slept. It's been 6 months since that night. I still travel, but not like before. I stay in crowded campgrounds now, near families and lights and the comfort of sound. Sometimes late at night when I park in a quiet spot, I'll hear a faint knocking, 3 times, evenly spaced. Always 3. I tell myself it's the metal contracting in the cool air. I tell myself it's the wind or my imagination. But deep down, I know it's not. I think about the people in those woods, the way they watched, the way everyone in town looked at me like I'd touched something I shouldn't have. There's a silence in those hills that doesn't forget. Still, I came out of it with something I didn't have before. Not courage, exactly, but clarity. You can plan your route, check your maps, apps, and think you know what's ahead, but out there, far from lights and comfort, you realize something simple and terrifying. Some places aren't meant to be found, and some people aren't meant to be seen. If you ever find yourself driving through rural West Virginia and you see a sign that's rusted beyond reading, with no one around for miles, keep driving. Because sometimes the danger isn't what waits for you in the woods, it's what follows you back out. I don't scare easily. I've spent years on the road, from the dry plains of Oklahoma to the fog-heavy ridges of the Smokies, sleeping alone in my RV under more stars than I can count. But West Virginia, that place did something to me. It stripped away the little confidence I thought experience had built. It's strange how silence and a pair of human eyes watching from the dark can remind you how fragile you really are. My name's Mark. I'm 37, and I've been traveling alone for almost 2 years now. Most people think living on the road means freedom, and it does in a way, but it also means you're constantly a guest in someone else's backyard. You learn quickly that small towns have long memories, and strangers aren't always welcome. That autumn, I was making my way through rural West Virginia, following the back roads south of Elkins, into the folds of the Monongahela National Forest. My plan was simple: 3 nights off-grid, 1 night near a local campground for water and supplies, then back on the road toward Virginia. I wanted quiet, a stretch of sky unspoiled by neon or engine noise. The first sign of unease came before I even reached camp. It was late afternoon, that kind of washed-out gray light that makes distance hard to judge. The GPS had sent me off the main road, a narrow lane half-eaten by mud, and for nearly 40 minutes I didn't see another soul. I remember thinking the forest looked too dense, like it swallowed sound. Every turn was tighter, every mile a little darker. And then, out of nowhere, I saw it. An old wooden sign, hand-painted, half-buried under leaves. Raven Rock Campground, 2 miles. The lettering was chipped and uneven, like someone had painted it decades ago, but it felt handmade, human, real. And that felt safer than nothing, so I followed it. By the time I pulled into the clearing, dusk had turned the trees into silhouettes. There were no marked lots, no hookups, no office, just a faded picnic table, an old fire ring, and what looked like the ruins of a small bathhouse tucked behind the tree line. I cut the engine and sat there a moment, listening. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was pressurized. You know that kind of quiet where even your heartbeat sounds too loud? That. Still, I'd camped in worse. I parked near the edge of the clearing, backed the RV toward the trees, and stepped out to stretch my legs. The air smelled like rain and old leaves. cold enough to see my breath. That's when I noticed something strange. There were boot prints near the picnic table, deep ones, not old, and a few cigarette butts pressed into the dirt. That wouldn't have bothered me if not for the fact that they circled the RV pad like someone had been pacing around it. I told myself maybe a hunter had stopped by recently. Maybe kids. That kind of reasoning is what keeps you sane out there. I set up camp quickly. A small fire, a can of chili, a few recorded notes for my travel log. I try to document everything, not for YouTube or anything like that, just for myself. The road can blur together if you don't leave breadcrumbs of memory behind. Around 9 p.m., the fire had burned down to coals. I was sitting inside the RV with the lights low reading when I heard it, a dull metallic thud, not a tree branch, not an animal. It came from the rear of the vehicle, like someone had dropped a wrench against the bumper. I froze, waited, nothing, just the hum of the fridge and my own breathing. I got up, slid the curtain aside. Darkness. The firelight outside had died completely, and the forest beyond was pitch black. Still, that noise, it had a deliberate weight to it, like a person trying to move quietly but not quietly enough. I grabbed my flashlight, opened the door, and stepped out. Cold air hit me instantly. I swept the beam around the clearing. Empty. No movement, no sound. I walked around the RV, checked the hitch, the tires, even the storage compartments. Everything looked fine. I was just about to go back inside when I saw something wedged under the rear tire. A beer can. Crushed but clean. No mud, no rust. Someone had left it there recently. I picked it up, tossed it aside, and told myself again not to overthink it. Maybe someone had camped here last night. Maybe they'd forgotten it. I locked the door, killed the interior lights, and sat at the small table for a long time, just listening. The woods creaked and sighed like they were alive, but no more noises came. Sleep didn't come easy. I woke up around 1:30 a.m. to what I thought was footsteps outside, soft, uneven. They circled once, twice, then stopped. I held my breath. The sound came again, slow, deliberate crunches in the dirt. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. And then tapping. A single slow tap, tap, tap against the side of the RV. Not aggressive, almost testing, like someone dragging their fingernail against the metal. I sat there frozen, my hand on the flashlight, trying to decide if I should turn it on. I didn't. Whoever was out there, if anyone was, I didn't want them to know I was awake. Minutes passed, maybe 10. Then silence. I stayed up the rest of the night, staring at the door until the first gray light crept through the window blinds. When I finally stepped outside, the ground was wet from dew, and near the driver's side door, there it was, a set of footprints. Deep, fresh, leading toward the tree line. I wanted to leave right then, but the road out was rough, and I was exhausted. I told myself I'd grab coffee in town later and laugh about how jumpy I'd been. But then, around mid-morning, an old pickup truck appeared at the edge of the clearing. It crawled toward me like it had all the time in the world. An early 90s Chevy, dented, pale green, no plates. The driver's window rolled down just enough to show a man's face. Early 50s, heavy-set, beard graying, eyes small and watchful. "Morning," he said. His voice was slow, local. "Morning," I replied. He looked at the RV, then at me. "You from around here?" "Just passing through." He nodded, but it wasn't a friendly nod. "That's private land back there." He gestured toward the forest. "Didn't see any signs." "Yeah, folks take 'em down sometimes." He stared at me a second longer than felt normal. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. "You be careful out here," he said, rolling the window up. The truck backed up, turned, and disappeared into the trees. I stood there a long time, listening to the fading growl of that engine. My hands were shaking. That night, I couldn't bring myself to stay another hour at that site. I packed everything, started the RV, and headed back toward the main road. But halfway down that muddy path, my headlights caught something. A glint of metal nailed to a tree. A new sign, roughly carved, painted in red. No camping. I hadn't seen it on the way in. And for some reason, beneath the words, someone had scratched a single name into the wood. Maybe a warning, maybe a signature. It said, R. Kells. I didn't know it then, but that name would come back to me. Later, when I finally learned what Raven Rock really was. By the time I reached pavement again, the morning sun had burned off most of the fog. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I wasn't panicking, not exactly, but something in my gut wouldn't unclench. Every instinct said don't go back, but curiosity, that old poison that gets men like me in trouble, kept whispering, find out why. There was a small town about 20 miles east, Millstone Hollow, population maybe 300. I stopped at the only gas station that looked open. The place was half convenience store, half bait shop, and smelled like diesel and old coffee. Inside, two men were talking quietly near the counter. Both looked up when I came in. That slow, assessing kind of look small towns give outsiders. I poured coffee, paid, and tried to sound casual. Hey, I said to the cashier, do you know a place called Raven Rock Campground? Saw an old sign out that way. He didn't answer right away, just stared at me for a second, then glanced toward the other man. Ain't been called that in a long time, he finally said. What's it called now? Nothing, he said. Ain't a campground anymore. Closed off after the flood. You camping out there? Just one night, I said, trying to sound light. Didn't see any no trespassing signs. He shook his head slowly. You must have missed them. Folks around here don't go back there no more. Why not? The second man, the one by the door, let out a dry laugh. 'Cause it ain't safe, he said. Ground shifts after rain. People get stuck, fall in the washouts, dead. Last guy who went missing out there, hell, that was, what, Kells, back in 04? That name hit me like cold water. Kells? Yeah, the man said, squinting. Randy Kells, worked construction up in Elkins, came out hunting, didn't come back. Cops looked for weeks, never found nothing but his truck. Locals said he was drunk, wandered too far. Others said he trailed off like the air had gone heavy. I waited. Said what? The cashier spoke again, quieter this time. Said somebody helped him disappear. The two men exchanged a look that told me they'd already said too much. The first one tipped his hat, muttered something about chores, and left. The cashier rang up another customer and didn't look at me again. I stood there for a while after, staring at the chipped countertop, the old fly buzzing against the window, trying to decide whether to dig deeper or just drive south and forget the whole thing. I wish I'd chosen the second option. By afternoon, clouds had rolled in again, that heavy Appalachian kind that promise rain but take hours to deliver. I pulled into a small diner on the edge of town for lunch, still turning the name over in my head. R. Kells. The way it was scratched into that wood didn't feel like a memorial. It felt like a warning. The diner was almost empty. A waitress in her 50s poured coffee without asking. Her name tag read, Darla. You traveling? She asked, eyeing the mud on my jeans. Yeah, I said, spent the night up by Raven Rock. Her hand froze mid-pour. You camped there? Just one night. Didn't know it was off limits. She set the pot down, her mouth tightening. Honey, you're lucky your RV started this morning. I half smiled. Why's that? Because folks who park out there alone don't always make it back to town. Some say it's the land. Others say it's people who don't like strangers sniffing around. Her tone wasn't dramatic, just matter of fact, like she was telling me the weather. What people? I asked. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. There's a family up that way. Used to own part of the land before the state took it, lost it in a property dispute after the flood. Been sore about it ever since. One of them was a Kells. That name again? I asked. You mean Randy Kells? She shook her head. No, Randy was the son. His daddy's the one you ought to worry about, Rayburn Kells. Still lives up off Millstone Ridge. Folks say he ain't been right since the state took their land. Mean as a cornered dog, that one. I thanked her, left a few bills on the table, and went back to the RV. My head was spinning. Every instinct screamed leave, but something about the unfinished nature of it, that name carved into wood, the footprints, the man in the truck, it all felt connected, like a puzzle someone had left unsolved just for me. So I did what people in stories like this always do. I went back. The road to Raven Rock looked different in daylight, less menacing, but still claustrophobic. trees leaning in, branches scraping against the RV roof like fingernails. I parked near the same clearing as before, engine idling. The fire ring was gone. Someone had filled it in with dirt. That's when I saw fresh tire tracks, smaller than the RVs, maybe a pickup or ATV. They led toward the old bathhouse. I grabbed my flashlight and walked the short trail through the trees. The building looked even worse than I remembered. Roof half collapsed, windows shattered, graffiti scrawled across the walls. Inside, the smell hit me first. Rot and rust. The floor was littered with old beer cans, broken glass, and something else. A pile of bones. Deer, maybe. Small, white, stripped clean. But they'd been stacked deliberately, like some kind of crude pyramid. I crouched down, studying them, and that's when I heard an engine in the distance. Low, steady, getting closer. My stomach dropped. I killed the flashlight and backed into the shadows. Through the cracked window, I saw the same green pickup truck from before roll into the clearing. The man got out slowly, scanning the tree line. He wasn't alone this time. Another figure stepped out of the passenger side, younger, thinner, maybe mid-20s, carrying a shotgun. They stood there talking for a moment, but I couldn't make out the words. Then the older man, Rayburn, I assumed, pointed toward my RV. They started walking toward it. I didn't breathe. My pulse hammered in my ears as I realized what they were about to do. The younger ones circled to the back. The older man opened the driver's door like he already knew it would be unlocked. I heard the thud of boots, the rustle of drawers being opened, things tossed aside. They were searching it. For what? I didn't know. I stayed hidden, counting seconds in my head, waiting for any chance to slip away. Then the younger man called out, "Ain't nothing here." "Check under the bed," the older one replied. His voice was calm, too calm. I could barely see through the cracks in the wood, but I caught a glimpse of the older man's face in the light, and something about it chilled me. He looked content, like he'd done this before. After what felt like an hour, they climbed back into the truck and drove off, the sound of gravel fading into the trees. I waited another 10 minutes before moving. My legs were trembling so bad I could barely stand. When I finally reached the RV, the door was hanging open and everything inside had been torn apart. Clothes, food, even the floor hatch. They weren't just looking for valuables, they were searching for me. That realization hit like a punch to the gut. I don't remember starting the engine. I just remember the sound of tires spinning in mud, branches snapping against the sides. My chest so tight I could barely breathe. I didn't stop driving until I hit Route 33, and even then, I kept going until nightfall. I pulled into a rest area outside Franklin, parked between two semis, and sat there in the dark, hands shaking on the wheel. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving only exhaustion and disbelief. Why me? Why the footprints, the tapping, the sign with that name? I kept replaying the image of those two men, the way they moved, not like strangers exploring, but like owners defending what was theirs. And then it hit me. The red paint on that sign. It wasn't paint. It was dried rust-colored stain, streaked unevenly, like it had been brushed on in anger. That night, I didn't sleep at all. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind to call the sheriff's office. I'd tell them everything. The footprints, the men, the break-in, all of it. But when I stopped in Franklin and walked into the tiny sheriff's substation, the deputy behind the desk looked up from his newspaper with the same expression I'd been getting since I rolled into this part of the state. Polite, but distant. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked. I told him. Every detail. The old campground, the truck, the men, the name Kells. He just listened, chewing on a toothpick, eyes never quite meeting mine. When I finished, he scratched something on a pad and said, "You said that was up near Raven Rock?" "Yeah," he sighed. "That land's been in dispute for years. Hard to say who owns what out there anymore. If they told you to move along, best thing to do is just stay gone." "That's it?" I asked. "They broke into my RV," he shrugged. "Ain't much we can do without witnesses or evidence. You got a plate number?" "No, it didn't have one." "Well," he said, pushing back his chair, "then you got nothing." He wrote something on a scrap of paper, his name, a number, and handed it to me. "If they follow you, give me a call. Otherwise, I'd just keep driving. That was it. No report, no questions. Just that flat, small-town finality that tells you you're on your own. I walked out to the parking lot, the sky thick with low clouds. I should have felt relieved. I was miles from that clearing, safe in daylight. But something in me couldn't let it go. I needed closure. I needed to know why. That evening, I parked at a small RV site on the outskirts of town. I'd planned to rest, regroup, maybe get a hot shower. But as I stepped out to stretch, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Mud, thick, red-brown, caked along the edge of the driver's door. Not from the gravel lot, from back there. I'd washed the RV that morning. I knew it wasn't there before. That meant someone had followed me. I checked the mirrors, scanned the lot. Just a handful of other campers, a family unloading near the water hookups, an old man sitting outside, a fifth wheel, smoking. Nothing suspicious. But fear changes your perception. Every face becomes a mask, every sound a signal. I locked up tight and sat in the dark, watching the parking lot through a slit in the blinds. For hours, nothing happened. But around midnight, a single headlight beam swept across the lot, slow, searching. I ducked instinctively. Through the crack in the blinds, I saw a familiar green pickup idling near the entrance. It stopped. The engine idled low. I couldn't see who was inside, but I knew. They'd found me. I grabbed my keys, started the engine, and rolled out of the lot without headlights, heart hammering so hard I could barely think. When I hit the main road, the truck followed, distant, but steady. The road wound through low hills, black on both sides. No cell service, no houses, just forest and fog. For 10, maybe 15 minutes, the truck stayed 200 feet behind me, never speeding up, never slowing down, just there, watching. Then its lights disappeared. For a few seconds, I thought I'd lost them, until I saw another light ahead, dim, flickering, a campfire. As I drew closer, my stomach turned. It was the same clearing. I slammed the brakes. My headlights caught the trees, the sign, the hollow of the clearing, everything exactly as I'd left it. It didn't make sense. I'd been driving away, but somehow I'd looped back. The road twisted in ways I didn't remember. My GPS was blank. Behind me, the truck's engine growled back to life. Panic took over. I floored the gas, tore down the path, branches slashing against the windshield, mud flying. The road narrowed. I couldn't tell where it led. And then the headlights behind me swerved off the path and vanished into the trees. I didn't slow down. I just drove until the path ended in a dead stop, a wall of fallen rock and timber, a washed-out bridge ahead. I was trapped. I threw the RV into park, killed the engine, and listened. Nothing but the ticking of the cooling motor. Then, faintly, from the woods, a man's voice. Mark, my name, drawn out, low, deliberate. Every hair on my arms stood on end. I turned off every light, left crouched by the driver's seat, holding my breath. Mark, you left something behind. The voice was closer now, calm, confident. Then came the sound of footsteps on gravel, slow, steady. I peered out the windshield. The green truck rolled into view, headlights off. One figure in front, one behind, moving in the dark like they'd done this before. The older man, Rayburn, stepped into the faint light from my dash. I could see his face clearly now. The deep lines around his mouth, his city, the way his eyes didn't blink. This land don't forget, he said. You think you can just walk in and take pictures, tell stories? It's ours, always was. His son circled toward the back of the RV, shotgun glinting in the dark. My pulse roared in my ears. I knew if I stayed, I'd never make it out. I reached for the ignition, twisted the key. The engine coughed, then died, twice. Rayburn laughed, a short, sharp sound that froze my blood. You city folks, he said, always think you're safe behind locks and lights. But out here, it's different. Out here, the land decides who stays. He raised something in his hand, a crowbar. I don't remember deciding to move. Instinct took over. I lunged for the back hatch, kicked it open, and ran. The forest swallowed me whole. Branches tore at my clothes, mud sucked at my boots. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. Behind me, the shouts started. Two voices, one angry, one panicked. A gunshot cracked through the night, splintering bark near my shoulder. I ran harder. The terrain sloped downward. I slipped, hit the ground hard, rolled through wet leaves, and landed against a fallen log. My knee screamed, but I stayed still, forcing myself to breathe quietly. Footsteps passed close, maybe 20 feet away. The younger man's voice, "He's gone downhill." Rayburn's reply, "He won't get far." They split up. I waited until their voices faded, then crawled along the stream bed until I saw a faint orange glow in the distance. Headlights, maybe. A road. I followed the glow until I stumbled out onto a gravel shoulder, soaked, shaking, bleeding from a cut above my brow. A truck driver slowed, rolled down his window, and asked if I was all right. I lied, told him I'd wrecked my RV off the trail. He drove me to the next town. I never saw the Kells again. A week later, I went back, with 2 deputies from Randolph County. We found the RV flipped halfway down a ravine, windows smashed, doors open. Everything inside was gone, no sign of the green truck. The deputy told me quietly that the name Kells didn't show up in any current county records. The family's land had been seized decades earlier. The father, Rayburn, had died in 2011. I remember staring at him confused. "That's impossible. I saw him." The deputy just said, "You saw someone." He was right. I'll never know who they were. Maybe relatives, maybe squatters using the name as a threat. Maybe men who believed the woods still belonged to them, long after the law said otherwise. All I know is that when night falls in those mountains, the past doesn't stay buried. It breathes. It waits. It watches for people like me, people who think they can pass through without consequence. I left West Virginia that day and never went back. But sometimes when I park somewhere quiet, some lonely rest stop at 2 a.m., wind rocking the RV, I hear it again. That soft tap, tap, tap on the metal, not loud enough to be sure, just enough to remind me. Freedom on the road is a beautiful thing. But it comes with a truth nobody likes to say out loud. When you live alone in the wild, you're not really free. You're exposed. And the world out there, it's not empty. It's just waiting for you to stop pretending you're safe. That's why I tell people now, every time someone asks about camping in West Virginia, I say the same thing. Open quote, "Be respectful, trust your gut. Don't ignore the silence." Close quote. Because once you hear it, that silence that feels heavier than sound, it's already too late. I still travel, still chase those quiet roads, but I never forget what that man said in the dark. Open quote, "Out here, the land decides who stays." Close quote, and I believe him, because I left, and somehow, even now, part of me never really did. I remember the sound of rain before I remember the place. Not the heavy kind that slaps the earth and announces itself, but that thin, steady drizzle that just exists. The kind that turns silence into a presence. My name's Eli, I'm 38 years old, and for the last few years I've been traveling the back roads of the Appalachian states in my old Volkswagen camper, partly to escape, partly to think. I tell people I'm just chasing peace and solitude. Truth is, sometimes solitude chases back. It was late October when I drove into the Monongahela National Forest. The leaves had already lost their colors. The trees stood like dark ribs against the mist. My plan was simple. Park near one of those lesser-known dispersed sites, camp for a night or two, and finally catch up on the journal entries I'd been meaning to write. The road wound for miles through thickening fog, and my headlights caught nothing but wet gravel and the ghost of my own reflection in the windshield. There were no other vehicles, no sounds, just that quiet hiss of tires on damp earth. When I finally found a flat clearing just off the road, nothing more than a patch of ground ringed by birch trees, I parked and shut off the engine. The silence that followed felt heavier than the drive itself. There's something about stillness in the mountains. It's not peaceful the way people think. It has a pulse. It listens back. I got out, stretched, and felt that chill that seeps straight through denim and flannel. The smell of wet bark and iron-rich mud filled the air. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked. I told myself it was just a deer. It probably was. Inside the camper, I set up for the night. A lantern on the counter, the soft buzz of the propane heater, coffee in a tin mug, Everything about the moment should have been comforting. But I remember pausing, hand hovering over the light switch, realizing that once I turned that lantern off, there'd be no sound, no sight, nothing. And for a second, I didn't want to. When I finally did, the darkness outside swallowed everything. The only thing left was the faint patter of rain on the roof and the ticking of cooling metal. Then came the feeling. It wasn't fear yet, more like awareness, like the air had changed, the kind of moment where your instincts catch something your mind hasn't noticed. I sat there, listening, not for something loud, but for what had stopped. No wind, no insects, just a quiet so pure it hummed. I told myself it was altitude, maybe weather, maybe fatigue. I'd driven 9 hours that day. I hadn't eaten much. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that I'd parked somewhere I shouldn't be, not illegally, but wrongly, like the land itself didn't want company. I forced a chuckle under my breath. "You're fine, Eli," I said to no one, just tired. Sleep came in fragments. Every few minutes I'd drift off only to wake again. That soundless dark pressing against the windows, the soft groan of wood as the camper shifted. Around 2 a.m., I heard what I thought was dripping water near the door. I turned on the small lamp, checked the floor. Dry. I leaned closer. It wasn't dripping. It was tapping. 3, maybe 4 soft knocks. Not sharp enough to be a person, not random enough to be wind. I froze. My throat went tight, heart suddenly pounding so hard I could feel it behind my eyes. The knocking stopped. I waited, counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. It took everything in me to pull back the curtain by the door window. All I saw was fog, pale, almost glowing from the lamp inside, swirling in slow circles. There was no one there. But something was off. The fog wasn't moving naturally. It hung heavier to the left of the camper, like something was standing there, just out of sight, breaking the air's flow. I closed the curtain and backed away, telling myself over and over it was just my mind trying to make patterns in the mist. I even laughed at myself. Forced, hollow laughter that filled the small space and felt almost defiant. "Good one, Eli. You're losing it." I shut off the light and lay back down. The rain started again, that steady drizzle I'd heard when I first arrived, and somewhere between the rhythm of it and my own exhaustion, I drifted into uneasy sleep. When I woke, pale morning light was bleeding through the fog. The forest looked softer, but emptier. I stepped outside, stretching, trying to shake off the night's unease. Everything was wet, the ground slick with mud, leaves plastered to the side of the van. Then I noticed them. On the driver's side door, faint streaks. Not scratches, not dirt, just marks. 4 or 5 vertical lines about the height of a hand, blurred by rain. I leaned closer. They weren't deep enough to damage paint, but they were deliberate, not random. My stomach dropped. I touched one. It smeared slightly, mud, human mud, as if someone had run their fingers down the side of the van while I slept. The woods stayed quiet while I stood there, waiting for logic to catch up. Maybe I brushed against a branch last night. Maybe it was my own hand earlier, unloading gear. But I couldn't remember doing that. I spent the morning trying to distract myself, made breakfast, wrote in my journal, checked the map. The air smelled like wet pine and metal. Even the birds, usually loud after rain, seemed distant. Around noon, a Ranger truck rolled by on the gravel road. I waved it down, more for reassurance than anything. The Ranger was an older guy, weathered face, friendly in that West Virginia way where politeness doesn't necessarily mean warmth. "Everything all right out here?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just me and the fog." He nodded, eyes narrowing just slightly as he scanned the trees behind me. "You're fine as long as you don't wander too far. Folks get turned around in this weather, even locals. Lot of old mining ground out here." Then he paused, like he was about to say something else, but didn't. Instead, he tipped his hat. "Don't stay past dark if the fog gets thick again." That last line stuck with me. Not a warning, not really. More like advice from someone who's seen too much silence. After he left, the day dragged on heavy and gray. The clouds never lifted. The forest, if you could even call it that, under so much fog felt endless. By sunset, I'd almost convinced myself to pack up and drive somewhere else. Anywhere else, but pride kept me. I didn't want to admit I'd let a few noises and smudges chase me off. Still, that night, when the fog came rolling back thicker than before, swallowing the trees, muting the rain, erasing the sky, I started to wish I had. Because that's when the tapping returned, slower this time, and closer. The sound started as before, faint, uncertain, like rain pretending to be something else. 3 soft taps, spaced out, then silence. I froze in my bunk, eyes open in the dark, every muscle holding its breath. I didn't move, didn't even swallow. The fog pressed against the windows like it was trying to see in. Another tap. This time higher, near the roofline. I sat up slowly, careful not to make the camper creak. My heart beat so hard it filled the silence, louder than the rain. I tried to tell myself it was branches, maybe condensation dropping from the trees. But then came another sound, different, a soft drag. Fingertips, or something like it, sliding along the metal above me. The air inside the van turned thick, hard to breathe. I switched on my lantern, not because I wanted to see, but because the dark had begun to feel alive. The light filled the small space, but it didn't help. If anything, it made the world outside seem closer, like the fog had teeth pressed against the glass. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then came one more noise, a faint scrape on the passenger door, low to the ground. That was enough. I grabbed the flashlight, slipped on my boots, and opened the door as quietly as I could. The cold hit me like a wall, wet, metallic, raw. The fog was so thick I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. My beam of light just bounced off it, making the world small, shapeless. Hello? My voice came out thin, almost embarrassed. No answer, only the dripping of rain off the awning. I stepped around the front of the van. The mud sucked at my boots. Somewhere deep in the trees, something shifted. Not big, not loud, just there. Then in the haze, I thought I saw movement, a faint silhouette maybe 20 feet away, standing still. Too still. Hey, I called out, louder now. You okay out there? The shape didn't move. I blinked, and it was gone, melted into fog as if it had never been there. That's when I realized my hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from the kind of fear that feels rational and wrong at the same time. The part of you that knows you're alone but doesn't quite believe it. I backed up toward the van, every step deliberate. My light caught something on the ground. Fresh prints. They weren't boots. Not bare feet either. Just impressions, half washed by rain, of something human-shaped but lighter. As if whoever made them had been walking carefully. I knelt, trying to see them clearly, but the mud just reflected the beam like dull glass. My reflection looked back at me, pale and small. I got inside and locked the door. Then I shut off the light and sat still, listening. The heater clicked once, then hummed. I waited for the tapping to start again. It didn't. But the silence was worse. Time dragged in fragments. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, a thin gray light was bleeding through the windows. Dawn. I hadn't even realized I'd slept. I stepped outside. The fog had thinned a little, but the cold bit harder. My breath came out like smoke. Everything was wet, shining under the dim light. No prints this time. No streaks. Just that same stillness, like the forest had taken a breath and never exhaled. I boiled coffee on the stove and tried to laugh at myself again. You're jumpy, Eli. You hear some rain, you see your own shadow, and you're writing ghost stories. But the truth was, I wasn't imagining the unease. I could feel it. In the way the forest held sound, in how the fog refused to lift, even as the morning stretched on. By noon, I decided to pack up. Whatever peace I'd been hoping to find out here, it wasn't coming. I was stowing the propane tank when I noticed something strange near the tree line. A small patch where the ground looked disturbed. Fresh mud, footprints again, but this time leading away deeper into the forest. It was none of my business. But curiosity is a funny thing. It doesn't ask permission. I grabbed my jacket and flashlight, told myself I'd just take a quick look. The prints were faint, spaced oddly far apart, like someone walking cautiously or barefoot on cold ground. They led between 2 birches, then down a narrow slope where the fog pooled thicker, milky as river water. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Even my own steps sounded muted. Then I saw it, a small clearing, maybe 15 feet across. In the center was a half-collapsed tent, canvas torn and slick with moss. An old one, the kind you'd see in army surplus stores decades ago. I stopped at the edge, scanning the ground. Everything looked untouched except for the mud at the tent's entrance, disturbed, trampled. Inside was a rusted lantern, a half-empty thermos, and something that made my skin crawl. A set of Polaroids scattered across the ground, warped by moisture. I crouched and picked one up. It showed the same forest, the same clearing, but there was a figure in it, barely visible, standing among the trees. Another photo showed a van, not mine, but old, maybe 70s, parked in almost the exact same spot where I'd camped. The third photo stopped my breath. It was of a person sleeping inside a camper. The shot was grainy, off-center, taken through a window. The angle was too close to be accidental. For a moment, I couldn't move. I felt every hair on my neck rise, every muscle wanting to turn and run, but rooted by disbelief. Then came the sound, footsteps. Behind me, slow, wet, heavy, heavy. I turned. Nothing. Just fog. The photos slipped from my hand. My flashlight beam shook across the trees, catching nothing but vapor. I forced my voice to sound steady. Hello? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was expectant. I backed away, keeping the light on the clearing. Then, just as I turned to head back up the slope, I heard a low exhale. Not wind, not animal. Breath. Human breath. Close enough that I could feel the moisture of it in the air. I ran. Branches snapped underfoot, mud splashed my jeans. I didn't stop until I saw the pale rectangle of my van through the fog. I dove inside, slammed the door, locked it, and sat shaking behind the wheel. For a long while, I couldn't even start the engine. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. When I finally did, the headlights cut through the fog, and there, just at the edge of light, something moved. A shape, thin, still, turned toward me. I pressed the gas. The van lurched forward, tires spitting mud, the shape swallowed by white. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, where the fog finally began to thin, and daylight had color again. I drove until my tank was nearly empty, pulled into a diner off the highway, and sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the window. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it all. But when I went to pay for coffee, the cashier pointed out something on my sleeve. Streaks of wet mud smeared high up near the shoulder. She smiled politely. Rough morning out there? I nodded. Yeah, I said softly. Something like that. That night at a motel 2 towns over, I checked the van before going inside. On the passenger door, faint under the layer of new rain, were fresh streaks, the same as before. 4 long lines running down the paint. Only this time, they were darker, thicker, like whoever left them wanted me to know they'd come closer. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fog, that colorless ocean swallowing the forest, the outline of that figure waiting just beyond the light, the sound of breath that wasn't mine. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have drifted off sitting upright on the motel bed. When I woke, sunlight was creeping in through the blinds, golden and harmless. For a moment, I almost believed it had all been a dream. But then I saw the mud-streaked sleeve on the chair and remembered. I decided to drive out of West Virginia that morning. No hesitation. I wanted distance, road, open sky. I wanted proof that the world was still wide and normal. But even as I merged onto the highway, something about the day felt wrong. The fog was gone, yet the world looked flat. The light too pale, every shadow too still. A few miles outside of Elkins, I stopped at a gas station. The attendant was an older man, radio playing low behind the counter, bluegrass humming through static. I paid for fuel and mentioned I'd been camping up near the Monongahela. He paused mid-motion. Up there this time of year? Yeah, I said. Didn't think much of it, just fog and rain. He stared for a second too long. Then, you go up near Smoke Hole or the Back Ridge, past Seneca Creek? Closer to Seneca. He nodded slowly, like he already knew something I didn't. That old forest holds things. Don't like being disturbed. I tried to laugh it off. What kind of things? He just shrugged. Depends who you ask. When I stepped outside, the wind had picked up, scattering wet leaves across the asphalt. As I filled the tank, I looked at the van. the side where the streaks had been. They were gone now, washed away by the rain. But I didn't feel relieved. I felt watched, the kind of watch that makes you move slower, not faster. I told myself I was overreacting. I got back in, started the engine, and kept driving south. The road wound through low hills, past barns collapsing into fields, through pockets of fog that clung so stubbornly to valleys like ghosts reluctant to leave. By mid-afternoon, I was starting to relax. The heater hummed, the radio mumbled faint country songs, and the monotony of roadwork and pine felt comforting. Normal. Until I noticed the car behind me. A black pickup. Old model, dented fenders, no plates. It had appeared out of nowhere on a long, empty stretch of road, maybe a half-mile back. Nothing unusual, except it kept perfect distance. Every time I turned, it turned. Every time I slowed, it slowed. I watched it through the mirror for 10 minutes, then 20. My palms started sweating. Finally, I pulled off at a rest stop. Just a gravel lot and a single vending machine half hidden behind trees. The truck passed me. Didn't slow. Didn't turn. I told myself again I was just rattled, seeing patterns where none existed. But when I got out, I saw something that made my knees weaken. On the side of my van, the driver's side this time, were those same 4 vertical streaks. Fresh. Still wet. I looked up and down the road. Nothing but empty hills. The wind rustling dry grass. No one there. I ran my hand along the marks. They weren't scratches. They were smeared. Deliberate, made by fingers dragging through mud. I could feel where the pressure had been heavier at the top, lighter toward the bottom. Whoever made them wasn't guessing. They'd done it slow, like they wanted me to see. I didn't think. I just drove. For hours. Through fading daylight, through rain that came and went, through radio static that sometimes broke into fragments of voices that weren't part of any station. By the time I reached a small roadside campground near the Virginia border, it was almost dark. My nerves were shot, my body shaking from exhaustion. I pulled into a spot near the edge of the lot. Gravel under my tires, a row of empty picnic tables facing the woods. There were other campers here, a few RVs, a couple tents. The sight of people should have comforted me, but instead it made the silence sharper. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, headlights still on, staring at the tree line, and then I saw it. Between 2 trunks, a shape, a figure, barely visible, still, watching. When I blinked, it was gone. That was the moment I broke. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't believe what was happening. I turned off the headlights, shut down the van, and just sat there in the dark, my pulse loud enough to feel in my fingertips. Minutes passed, maybe hours, I don't know. Then came a soft sound, not outside but above, a creak, something shifting its weight on the roof. The air in my lungs froze. Another creak. Then a slow slide, like someone crawling across metal. I didn't move, didn't even blink. The sound stopped, and then, in the reflection of the windshield, I saw it. A faint silhouette leaning down against the glass from above, head tilted, almost curious. I couldn't see a face, only the outline. I reached slowly for the keys, turned the ignition, and slammed the accelerator. The van jolted forward. I heard something slide off the roof, hit the gravel behind me. I didn't look back. I drove until there was no fog, no forest, nothing but stars. When I finally stopped, hours later, at a 24-hour truck stop off I-81, I parked under the floodlights and got out. The night air was sharp, alive. For the first time in days, I could breathe. But when I circled around to the back of the van, I saw something that still keeps me awake some nights. Handprints. Dozens of them. Pressed faintly into the dirt and dew coating the back doors, small, large, some smeared, some clear. As if a crowd had leaned against the van, whispering through their fingertips. I stood there, shaking, and realized there was no proof I could ever show anyone that would make sense. No video, no sound, just what I'd seen or thought I'd seen in that fog. Maybe it was a person, maybe several, maybe something older than that, not supernatural, just human in the way only the dark can be. Whatever it was, it had followed silence like a scent, and it had found me. I left West Virginia the next morning, haven't gone back since, but sometimes late at night when I park my van under open skies, Arizona, Colorado, doesn't matter, I'll hear it again, 3 soft knocks, and every time I tell myself it's just the wind, the heater, a branch, because it has to be. But deep down, I know the truth that the forest taught me. When you spend enough time alone, you realize silence isn't empty. It remembers you. It waits. And sometimes if you listen too long, it starts to listen back. If you've ever camped alone, truly alone, you know that feeling when the quiet turns strange, when the woods stop being background and start being audience. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's everything. If you've ever felt that, out there in the dark, share your story in the comments. And if you're new here, welcome to No Name, where we explore the stories that follow campers home. Remember, fear teaches if you're brave enough to listen.